So yes, after having lived 20 of my 33 years in Manhattan, New York City, it is true, I have finally decided to leave. In fact, I've already moved. New York City is where I grew up. It is still one of the greatest cities in the world. To be clear, this is not a video about how expensive it is to live in New York City. Yes, it will cost you $3,900 per month to get a small studio in Manhattan, New York City, whereas if you spend that same $3,900 and you go to Manhattan, Kansas, you can get a lovely, massive 8-bedroom home. That all is true, but that's also what you would expect when you live in a city as crowded and densely populated and full of job opportunities and 8 million people all also looking for apartments. But my complaints are actually a little bit different. Last year, I paid over 50% of all of the money that I made to the government. And what I got in return for spending that money in terms of public safety, infrastructure, etc., is very questionable. So how is it possible that living in the United States of America you can pay over 50% in taxes? New York City taxes your income both at a personal level with a 4% income tax, but also New York City has a separate up to 9% corporate tax, and then plus you have to pay New York state taxes, and then you also have to pay federal taxes. And it really gets complicated because it does depend on your accounting, and to be fair, I did make some accounting mistakes. But look, I'm actually not anti-tax. I just moved to New Jersey, which, in case you're unaware, is one of the highest tax states in the entire country. So I'm not anti-tax, right? And I think that businesses, even small businesses like mine, should have to pay their fair share in tax. My particular gripe is rather with how New York City decides to spend my money. And as a 50% plus taxpayer in New York City, I think that I have some standing to complain about this. First of all, let's talk about public safety. New York City has become, frankly, a terrifying environment within which to raise a family. Just a few weeks ago, I was pushing my 2-year-old son in a stroller down the block of our downtown New York City neighborhood, and there was a half-naked man on the block ahead of us, screaming at the top of his lungs, violently punching the air, in broad daylight. I had to push my son across the street just in order to avoid this person. And I actually had to do this about once a month. One time, just walking down the street, my friend was sucker punched in broad daylight. That never happened to me personally, but I was almost assaulted one time in the park. Some, again, half-naked crazy person comes up to me and gets really aggressive in my face and says, "Ah, what are you doing?" Starts screaming at me. There are even organizations in New York City now that will offer to walk you home from the subway stop if you don't feel safe. I actually don't want to exaggerate how bad living in New York City is because, listen, most of the time, frankly, it's quite a pleasant and normal place to live in. Even if it's only 10% of the time or 1% of the time, crazy and dramatic things like this happen. If you're a young single guy, you might not particularly mind, but if you have young children or you're a woman, it's simply not acceptable. Like, stuff like that can't happen anytime. My wife was not willing to go out on the street with my son by herself. She simply wasn't. Frankly, that just makes me feel ashamed of the city where I grew up. Now, speaking of places unacceptable for women or young children, we come to the subway, where things have gotten so bad that Governor Kathy Hochul has recently deployed the National Guard, yes, armed military personnel, to help ensure the safety of the subway. It's almost a meme in New York how many crazy people you encounter on the subway. In absolute numbers, the risks of being violently assaulted on the New York City subway are probably pretty low, although it does happen with some terrifying incidents like, people getting randomly slashed by, again, crazy people who should not be on the subway. It's really more about the feeling that you get when you come into the subway and there's somebody who is clearly unwell on that same subway car, again, possibly screaming his head off. Besides which, the subway is also extremely dirty and smells like excrement much of the time. The subway is actually such an embarrassment that people in other countries frequently make fun of how bad the subway system of our nation's biggest city is. And I know this because I actually made a video one time in Chinese talking about my awful experience on the subway that day when I had to get to work and all my trains were abruptly canceled 觉得不行了。好，然后开始走了。Hey, how's it going, man?
Good, man. How are you?
Good, thanks. So they're doing this really cool thing today where there's no subway again.
Oh, no subway?
Yeah.
I see. What you can do? Buy yourself a train?
Buy yourself a train, exactly. That's the only thing you can do. And it went viral on the Chinese internet. And Chinese people couldn't believe the state of our subway system. And what especially surprised them was the cost of our subway system. At the time, I mentioned in the video the $4.5 billion the New York government spent to build something like 3 stations. This was back in 2016. And Chinese people were completely shocked by that number. And since then, it's gotten even worse. The New York government recently completed construction on an $11 billion project to build 1 station. This being the East Side Access Project that may have actually decreased subway ridership. And I asked ChatGPT how much of the Shanghai Metro could get constructed with $11 billion. And ChatGPT said 50 to 150 kilometers for that same $11 billion that it costs New York to build just 1 station. Oh, well, China's an authoritarian government. They can just do whatever they want, right? Well, the thing is, New York City's subway system is many multiples more expensive than any other city in the entire world, including every single Western democratic city. Paris right now is somehow building 120 miles of tracks with 68 new stations for just $25 billion. And on a per kilometer basis, New York probably costs 10 times that. Even Los Angeles manages to build its metro lines for almost 6 times cheaper than New York does. So I'm looking at these numbers, and I'm looking at how New York City is spending my tax dollars, and I'm just thinking, where is all of this money going? You have these employees pulling $500,000 salaries when the New York City trains do not even run on time, and the entire system, frankly, smells like shit. So it's hard to escape the conclusion that the money is being wasted. New York is simply abusing taxpayer money. Where is it going? I mean, you have cities like Singapore that manage to have safe streets and a beautiful subway system while only taxing its inhabitants at 20%. And again, to reiterate, I'm not particularly anti-tax here either. It's really about how the money is spent. There are other places in the world that tax their inhabitants at greater than 50% tax rates, like Sweden, but Sweden actually manages to use that money efficiently and is able to offer its citizens free healthcare, free university, guaranteed pre-K, all of which you have to pay out of pocket for in New York City. And here's another thing I want to talk about, pre-K. So New York said a few years ago, we're going to take all of this taxpayer money and convert it into free daycare for every 3-year-old in this city. Hey, sounds like a great idea, right? Free pre-K for everybody. Well, guess what? My child is going to turn 3 this year, and it turns out that the 3K program is effectively dead. The government simply couldn't get it together, and it's extremely difficult as a normal citizen of New York City to get a spot. Again, despite spending all of this tax money, which in theory should ensure that you do have a spot in free daycare for your child. Like Sweden, which does manage to ensure free daycare for all of its children, or very low-cost daycare. This is also partially because New York City has experienced a surge of migrants recently who are taking many spots in this publicly funded daycare, and I can't stress enough how generally pro-immigrant I am. I think our country needs more immigration, not less. I think that immigration is almost precisely the thing that has made New York into one of the greatest cities in the entire world. But the problem is that New York is taking its tax dollars and lavishing it on migrants actually attracted to this tax money being given to them by the government of New York. You may be familiar with this, but New York offers free housing to anybody who shows up. This includes free and, until recently, effectively unlimited stays at $500 per night hotels. Actually, the mayor recently received a lot of criticism for spending $53 million on debit cards full of money for the same migrants. And I can't stress this enough, how much I love immigration to New York, but I just wish that the migrants were being attracted to New York City by some reason other than free $500 a night hotel stays. The homeless and mentally ill crisis in New York is such a big issue and such a better place to use that money than to spend it on unlimited free housing for migrants. It completely boggles the mind. And then there's just general other sundry issues with how the New York government conducts its business. I mean, the endless construction projects that seem to go on and on and on. Multiple neighborhoods I live in have been simply ruined. A park near where I used to live has been under construction for 5 years now, having already been delayed multiple times, which, by the way, has helped turn this park into a drug-infested murder zone. Another fun fact is that in New York City, there are now multiple illegal weed stores on every single block. This is true. Just go to the city and check it out yourself. And all this is because the New York City government could not get its act together with the licensing program. And so it's managed to grant only dozens of licenses for legal weed stores for a city of 8 million people. So yeah, I've moved to New Jersey. And honestly, I couldn't be happier about it. And by the way, I'm not alone. Unlike London, whose population has been dramatically increasing for years, NYC has actually lost 500,000 residents since 2020. The quality of life is way higher here. I get much more for my money, and things actually seem somewhat better run. And it's kind of sad because, you know, New York is and always will be my home, but it's frankly no longer a city where you can raise a family. And that's really sad.